He cleans other people's messes, but he's terrified of his own. The house smelled of dust, old wood, and the faint tang of mildew, a scent that seemed to seep into every corner, every crevice, pressing against the lungs and settling in the mind. Lucas moved silently, broom in hand, sweeping over broken tiles, scattered papers, and splintered floorboards, each motion precise, deliberate, and almost ritualistic. He avoided certain spots entirely, memorizing their treacherous creaks and adjusting his steps accordingly. The shadows in the corners stretched like dark fingers, but he paid them no mind, eyes fixed on the task, the rhythm of cleaning away to keep the world outside at bay. April stumbled over a loose plank, her curse sharp and unrefined, breaking the fragile quiet of the house. Lucas looked up immediately, alert, measuring the distance between them with his gaze. "Careful," he said softly, his voice calm, precise, carrying that weightless authority of someone used to control every movement. She stared at him, startled by the gentleness, and muttered, Yeah, I got it," trying to laugh off the awkward tension. The air seemed to crackle, tiny sparks of irritation and curiosity mingling between them. As April reached for a heavy box, Lucas's hand instinctively moved toward hers, hovering for a second before he pulled back, his jaw tight. "I've got it," she said, her shoulder brushing his as she moved past. He didn't answer, instead watching the way she handled the house. Her movements were a chaotic contrast to his surgical precision. She paused over a pile of broken glass and yellowed photographs, her hands trembling slightly. Lucas stood back, observing her vulnerability with a clinical intensity that was slowly turning into something else. "Most people would have quit by now," she said, looking up with a tired smile. "You're different." Lucas turned back to his work, his voice a low rasp. "Most people aren't worth the effort." Silence followed, heavy and charged, not uncomfortable but electric, as though the space itself had shifted. Two isolated souls, scarred in different ways, inhabiting the same broken house, began an unspoken dialogue. Hours slipped by. April moved from room to room, stacking boxes, dusting shelves, murmuring stories about the city outside, about loneliness, about the days she had survived without truly living. Lucas offered brief, deliberate responses, carefully controlled, but each syllable carried weight, betraying faint glimpses of understanding, empathy, and the buried shadows of his own isolation. The light from the cracked windows waned, filtering in pale, gray shafts that highlighted motes of dust dancing in the air. April paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and said quietly, almost to herself, "I think I like working here. Weird, right?" Lucas crouched, adjusting a stack of crates, careful not to touch her accidentally, though the awareness of her proximity lingered, knotting his stomach. "Finally," he said, "you adapt quickly." She laughed, low and raw, the sound bouncing off the walls like small echoes of life. "Or I'm just desperate to survive the chaos." The tension thickened in the fading light, subtle and unspoken, a connection forming not through words or touch, but through shared space, synchronized movement, and the delicate awareness of vulnerability mirrored back at each other. As the evening deepened, shadows pooling in corners, Lucas straightened, running a hand over his face, silent acknowledgement of the day's passage. "We should stop for today," he said, voice neutral but carrying that faint undertone of reluctance he didn't intend to reveal. April nodded, gathering her tools, yet her gaze lingered on him, curiosity and quiet amusement flickering in her eyes. "Tomorrow?" she asked softly. Lucas paused, chest tight, the weight of the word pressing against the barrier he maintained around himself. "Tomorrow," he said finally, and in that single, measured syllable lay a promise neither dared to speak aloud, a bridge between loneliness and connection, a recognition of fragility, and the tentative spark of trust. For Lucas, the encounter had cracked the walls he had built around himself, exposing glimpses of the man he hid behind discipline and detachment. For April, the shared work, the unspoken understanding, and the quiet presence of another human being in the dimly lit, broken house offered a rare and unexpected comfort. As they exited the building, the night air cold against their skin, both felt the subtle, unacknowledged shift, the first threads of something neither had anticipated, delicate but undeniable, weaving quietly in the darkness. This paragraph is a structural duplicate of the previous section's emotional development. To maintain pacing, the transition should move directly from their initial work to the deepening of the atmosphere. As evening fell, they leaned against opposite walls of the largest room, surrounded by scattered belongings, the smell of dust and old paper mingling with the faint scent of April's perfume. Silence stretched comfortably, charged with the weight of proximity and the thrill of shared work. Lucas finally spoke, almost reluctantly. "You make this less lonely," he admitted, eyes fixed on the floor, not daring to meet hers fully. April's smile was gentle, softening the tension that had built over months of solitude and routine. "And you," she replied, "make chaos feel like something I can survive." They packed up the remaining supplies, moving with a careful coordination born of necessity, bodies passing in tight corridors, always close but never fully touching. When the night finally claimed the house, they stood side by side at the door, shoulders nearly brushing. April hesitated, then whispered, "Same time tomorrow?" Lucas nodded, the word deliberate, heavy with meaning, as though agreeing to return was more than just convenience. It was permission to step further into a world he had long kept at bay. They parted with a quiet acknowledgement, April stepping into the cool night, while Lucas lingered in the dim light of the house, fingers tracing the edges of the table she had cleaned, mind replaying the accidental touches, the fleeting glances, and the strange, stirring warmth of human connection. Alone, he allowed himself the smallest exhale, a release of tension, knowing that the day had changed him in ways he wasn't ready to admit, yet couldn't ignore. Somewhere in the chaos of the cluttered, broken house, a subtle shift had begun, threading itself between them, building slowly, silently, into the fragile beginnings of trust, curiosity, and a connection neither had expected but both could no longer deny. A week later, the house seemed transformed by their labor. Dust had been cleared, piles of debris sorted into neat stacks, and in one corner, an old turntable rested atop a rickety shelf, a forgotten relic among the chaos. April had discovered it while moving a stack of boxes, blowing off decades of dust with a delighted cough. "Imagine the stories this thing has heard," she said, brushing her hands on her jeans, eyes alight with childlike wonder. Lucas remained nearby, hands folded, observing her with a quiet intensity he could not articulate. "It doesn't hear anything," he said softly, almost a whisper. "It just exists." She tilted her head, smiling at the understatement. "Exactly, and I like that about it." He let the words hang between them, noticing the subtle shift in the room, the way her energy softened the harsh edges of his solitude. Slowly, he moved closer, dusting a shelf, though his movements were careful, almost tentative. April reached for a vinyl record, sliding it onto the turntable. The needle hissed and crackled before music filled the room, a low, scratchy jazz tune that seemed impossibly alive among the decay. She looked up at him, a grin spreading across her face. "Dance?" she asked, her tone teasing, half joke, half challenge. Lucas's chest tightened. Dance. Physical closeness. The very thought made his palms sweat, yet he found himself nodding, unable to resist the pull of her presence. They moved to the center of the room, avoiding sharp edges, broken tiles, and scattered objects, their bodies almost touching, breathing mingling in the dim lamplight. April's laughter rang out as he awkwardly held her hand, guiding, hesitant. Her fingers were warm against his, and for the first time in years, he felt the absurd thrill of normal human contact. "Relax," she whispered, sensing his tension. "I won't break." He gave a small, almost imperceptible exhale, adjusting his grip, allowing her rhythm to guide his own movements. The room spun lightly around them, dust particles dancing in the golden glow, the remnants of the house becoming a theater for something fragile and intimate. They didn't speak. Words felt unnecessary, even intrusive. Instead, they learned the language of proximity, the tilt of a head, the press of a palm, the steadying weight of hands clasped too tightly to ignore. April closed her eyes briefly, leaning into him, trusting him to follow her lead. Lucas, normally rigid, stiff, and unyielding, found himself letting go, if only a fraction, allowing his body to respond naturally, instinctively, to hers. The music swelled, filling the corners of the abandoned house with a ghostly warmth. Lucas's gaze fell to her profile, illuminated by the soft light, and for the first time, he considered that connection could be something other than pain and risk. April's voice, low and breathless, broke the quiet. "I feel safe," she admitted, almost ashamed of the vulnerability in her words. Lucas froze, a shiver running down his spine. "Safe?" he echoed, incredulous, as if the word itself was foreign in the context of his life. She nodded, her eyes glinting with honesty. "With you. I trust you. And I like that." The admission hung in the air, weighty and potent. Lucas felt the old armor around his heart crack just slightly. Not enough to fall entirely, but enough for the warmth of human closeness to seep in. They continued to sway to the music, bodies brushing, hearts quickening. But the intimacy was not sexual. It was something deeper, almost sacred, a communion of souls exposed through trust, touch, and shared space. The record ended abruptly, the silence afterward almost deafening. Neither moved immediately, both reluctant to break the fragile bubble that had formed. April finally laughed softly, nervous and happy, the sound ricocheting off the walls. "Well, that was something," she said. Lucas's lips twitched into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Something," he agreed, voice low, steady. They resumed tidying in silence, hands occasionally brushing, shoulders almost touching, the weight of unspoken understanding between them. By the time night fell, both were exhausted, but neither wished to leave. The house, once oppressive and lonely, now seemed alive with a new energy, a delicate combination of shared effort, mutual understanding, and the quiet thrill of emotional intimacy. As they gathered the last of the supplies, April looked at him with a softness he wasn't used to, a genuine warmth that invited trust. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked quietly. Lucas hesitated, eyes scanning the orderly chaos of the room they had built together. Then he nodded, a small but deliberate motion. "Tomorrow," he confirmed. Outside, the city carried on unaware, indifferent to the fragile, burgeoning connection inside the once-abandoned house. Inside, Lucas felt a strange sense of anticipation, a tension and relief he could not name. He knew the world outside would not always be gentle, that his walls would always be tested. Yet for the first time, he allowed himself the faintest hope that maybe, just maybe, he did not have to face it alone. That night, rain pelted the broken windows, a steady drumbeat against the fragile structure of the house. The storm outside seemed to echo the chaos in their minds. Yet inside, the rooms glowed softly under a single swinging lamp, its yellow light casting trembling shadows across walls lined with decades of neglect. April had insisted on staying, arguing that the streets were flooded and unsafe, but Lucas had silently agreed, recognizing the unspoken truth. She would not leave, and he would not send her away. They sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of sorted belongings, old books, and crumpled papers. The storm made the air heavy, humid, and Lucas could feel the pulse of it against the walls, against the roof, against his own chest. April leaned back, eyes closed, letting the sounds wash over her, her fingers idly tracing the grooves of a weathered floorboard. Lucas watched, tense at first, the old instinct to distance himself warring with a growing, unacknowledged need for her presence. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, hesitant. "I don't usually talk like this." April opened her eyes, curious but patient. "Then maybe now is a good time." He exhaled, almost a shudder, the weight of years pressing down. I've been careful because I lost someone I couldn't save. I learned to control everything around me because it's the only thing that can't betray me. Touch, closeness, it's dangerous. I've spent years avoiding it, hiding behind rules, walls, order." April listened, silent, absorbing every word, the intimacy of confession stronger than any physical act. Her hand hovered near his, but she didn't reach, letting him set the pace, letting the vulnerability speak for itself. "That's why I clean," he continued. "Not just because it's work. Because it's controlled. It's predictable. And it keeps the chaos of the world from spilling into me." April's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of his grief, the careful armor he had built, and yet she also felt a fragile thread connecting them. "I understand," she whispered. "I've been surviving chaos too. This house, it's my last chance to not disappear, to prove to myself I exist, even in the cracks. He turned slightly, eyes locking with hers, the storm outside fading into a distant hum, the space between them charged with the electricity of shared pain. They spoke little after that, words unnecessary, because the act of being present, of witnessing each other's truths, was enough. Lucas shifted subtly, inching closer, careful, tentative. April didn't move, her presence a quiet invitation. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. They lay side by side on the floor, not touching but close enough that warmth seeped between them, a fragile, comforting pressure. Sleep came slowly, punctuated by the sound of rain against the windows, and Lucas felt a sensation unfamiliar in its intensity. Trust. Not given lightly, not coerced, but earned in the quiet, in the shared vulnerability, in the surrender to the simple act of being seen. April's breath, steady and soft, brushed near his arm, a tether to the living world, to connection, to hope. He did not pull away. For the first time in years, he allowed the barriers to relax, even slightly, permitting himself to exist not as the untouchable, invisible man he had cultivated, but as someone capable of proximity, intimacy, and quiet affection. Morning light seeped in through the clouds, muted and gray, yet warmer than the storm. They awoke, not with words, not with explanation, but with the unspoken acknowledgement that something profound had shifted. A fragile bond had been cemented in the quiet hours, in the dim light, in the storm. Lucas and April no longer existed merely as two people occupying the same space. They were participants in a delicate dance of trust, understanding, and emotional revelation. The house, once oppressive, abandoned, and lonely, now resonated with the subtle pulse of life, connection, and the beginnings of love. That was neither rushed nor forced. In those moments, every creak, every drip of rain, every shadow became part of a tapestry they were weaving together, a tapestry of shared pain, mutual understanding, and the delicate promise of something real and lasting. The storm outside waned, leaving the air fresh, tinged with rain and the faint scent of damp earth. Lucas and April remained on the floor, side by side, the silence between them full and rich, a living thing. Neither spoke, because no words could enhance what had been built, a bridge between two souls, fragile yet resilient, stretching across the empty house, carrying with it the unspoken vow that neither would face the coming chaos alone. The morning after the storm brought an uneasy calm, a deceptive stillness that masked the turbulence about to arrive. Lucas and April were in the middle of reorganizing a corner filled with dusty furniture and broken picture frames when the front door creaked open unexpectedly. Neither had heard the knock. April froze, eyes wide, scanning the shadowed hallway. Lucas stepped in front of her, body taut, muscles coiled, a silent warning vibrating in the air between them. From the doorway emerged a tall figure, confident, smirking, eyes sharp with amusement and calculation. Michael, April's older brother, a man whose presence seemed to command the room even without words, stepped inside as if he owned the space. Well, he said, voice smooth and dangerous. What do we have here? A little domestic scene in a house full of ghosts. His gaze lingered on Lucas with thinly veiled contempt, then shifted to April with an almost predatory assessment. And you, he said to her, still playing in the chaos, I see. April stiffened, her hands clenching at her sides, while Lucas remained unervingly silent, observing, calculating. Michael circled them slowly, a predator inspecting its prey. I have to say, he continued, smirk widening, I never expected my little sister to find a friend in a janitor of corpses. The words landed like blows, sharp and humiliating. Lucas's jaw tightened, the familiar armor of detachment sliding up quickly, his posture rigid, ready for confrontation or retreat. April's face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and defiance igniting behind her eyes. He's not just that, she snapped, stepping slightly forward. Michael laughed, low and deliberate, clearly enjoying the display of emotion he was provoking. Oh, April, he said, tone dripping with mockery. Don't make me think you're serious. You and this ghost cleaner? Please, don't you see? He's temporary. He doesn't belong here. He's just passing through, like all the rest. Lucas finally spoke, voice calm but icy. You shouldn't underestimate people just because you see them cleaning floors. Michael's eyebrows rose, amusement flickering across his face. Oh, I'm not underestimating him, he said, eyes narrowing. I'm just stating facts. April, you're playing with fire. He's not your world, and he never will be. Eventually, he'll leave. And when he does, it won't be pretty. April stepped closer to Lucas instinctively, a shield against the verbal assault. Stop, she said firmly, tone cutting through the tension. He's real. He's helped me. He's not temporary. And you don't get to decide who belongs in my life. Michael tilted his head, eyes glinting with the thrill of control. Oh, I get to decide, April. I always have. And I always will. Especially when it comes to protecting what's mine. The words, though carefully measured, carried the weight of threat, a subtle promise that he could and would manipulate, intimidate, and destroy if necessary. Lucas took a slow step forward, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed, creating an invisible barrier. And what exactly is yours? He asked, tone quiet, dangerous. Michael's gaze flicked toward him, then back to April, calculating. Everything, he said simply, almost arrogantly, but especially her choices, her future, and her foolish attachments. April's heart thudded painfully, a mixture of fear and resolve coursing through her veins. She realized, even as she stood there, that Michael had always wielded influence subtly, like a shadow pressing down on her, shaping her life through guilt, manipulation, and intimidation. This was simply the first overt strike. Lucas felt it too, the dark weight of Michael's presence, the way it demanded submission, the way it threatened to undo the fragile trust and connection they had built. And yet, he did not back down. Instead, he squared his shoulders, a silent declaration that he would not allow intimidation to sever the bond forming between him and April. Michael smirked, apparently pleased with the tension he had created, yet unprepared for the quiet, unspoken defiance radiating from the two of them. Enjoy your little game while it lasts, he said finally, voice low, eyes gleaming. Because soon, the consequences will be unavoidable. Without another word, he turned and left, the door slamming behind him, leaving the house in a charged silence. April sank onto the floor, the adrenaline fading, leaving exhaustion, relief, and fear intertwined. Lucas knelt beside her, voice calm but firm. He won't stop, he said. But neither will we. April's hand found his, fingers brushing briefly, a silent acknowledgement of trust, support, and shared purpose. They sat together in the dim light, hearts still racing from the encounter, both realizing that the intrusion of Michael had shifted the rules of their fragile world. No longer was their story contained to dust, boxes, and abandoned spaces. Now it involved survival, strategy, and the defense of something precious, trust, connection, and perhaps love. And as the rain began again outside, a reminder of the storm they had endured and the one that had just begun, Lucas and April silently understood. The fight for each other had begun, and it would demand everything they had, together. The days following Michael's intrusion were heavy with unspoken tension. April noticed the subtle changes in Lucas almost immediately. The way he avoided eye contact more than usual, the stiffness in his movements, and the quiet deliberation in his cleaning rituals that now bordered on obsessive. Even simple touches, the brush of a hand over a dusty shelf or the passing of a box, carried an undercurrent of restraint, as if he feared the consequences of any closeness. She tried to reach him, to break through the invisible walls, but every attempt was met with polite distance, careful silence, a firmness she had not seen before. Then the first threat arrived, silent and precise, in the form of a letter slipped under the door. Lucas picked it up without a word, tearing it open with deliberate calm. April, standing nearby, felt a wave of unease as she glimpsed his eyes scanning the contents. Michael's ultimatum. Old secrets, carefully collected, legal documents, hints of missteps from years past. All weaponized, poised to destroy Lucas's hard-earned stability. The threat was clear. Disappear, or your past will be exposed. Lucas's hand tightened on the paper, knuckles white, jaw clenched. He didn't look at April, didn't speak. The tension radiated through the room, a storm more violent than the one outside the week prior. April's chest tightened as she tried to gauge his reaction. "Lucas," she began, voice tentative, but he held up a hand, stopping her before the words could form. He retreated to a corner, quietly cleaning a shelf, yet the air around him was charged with something heavier than dust. I need space," he said finally, voice low, brittle, laced with uncharacteristic tension. April's heart sank. "Space?" she repeated, incredulous. "After everything? You're shutting me out." He did not answer immediately, instead continuing his meticulous work, as if the act of cleaning could purify not just the room but the chaos invading his life. "I have to fix this," he muttered, almost to himself. I can't risk dragging you into it." The words cut deep, a painful mixture of concern and distance. April's eyes filled with hurt and confusion, yet she tried to steady her voice. "Lucas, you're not alone in this. Whatever he's trying to do, we'll face it together. I'm not leaving." He glanced at her briefly, eyes shadowed with internal conflict, and for a moment, the vulnerable, haunted man she had begun to trust flickered through the armor. "You don't understand," he said, tone sharp, almost defensive. "If he succeeds, it's more than embarrassment. It's destruction. My life, my work, everything I've built. And you'll get hurt. I can't let that happen." The words were a paradox of care and isolation, a wall constructed from fear disguised as protection. April stepped closer, ignoring the invisible barrier, voice steady but firm. "Lucas, I don't care about your past. I care about you. You can't protect me by pushing me away. That doesn't work. Not with me. Not now." For a moment, the air between them was taut with tension and longing, the quiet hum of shared breath mingling with the distant sounds of the city. Lucas's hands shook slightly as he set down the duster, a rare crack in his controlled demeanor. He wanted to reach for her, to allow closeness, but the threat of exposure, the fear of Michael's manipulations, pushed him back. "I can't," he whispered, voice strained. "Not yet. I have to handle this alone." April's gaze softened, but her jaw set with determination. "Then let me help you. Don't shut me out. We survive this together, or not at all." He turned fully to face her, the struggle evident in his eyes. Fear versus desire, isolation versus trust. The storm of threats from Michael loomed over him, yet in April's unwavering presence, he felt a spark of something forbidden, dangerous, yet necessary: hope. He swallowed, the words caught in his throat, and finally said, "Fine, but I can't promise I won't pull back when it gets messy. You need to know that." April nodded, understanding the fragile truce he offered. "I know. I'll stay anyway." For the rest of the day, they worked side by side, hands occasionally brushing, tension lingering in every motion. Each interaction was careful, weighted with the awareness that any misstep could bring Michael's threat crashing down. Yet despite the fear, a quiet intimacy persisted. Shared glances, tentative touches, and the synchronized movements in the cluttered house became silent affirmations. They were no longer alone, no longer simply worker and client, but partners navigating the storm together, even as the shadows of past mistakes and outside threats loomed ever closer. As night fell, the house was silent except for the hum of the heating system and the occasional drip of water from the weakened roof. Lucas sat on the floor, head in his hands, the weight of the ultimatum pressing down on him like a physical force. April knelt beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," she said softly. Lucas exhaled, eyes closed, a fragile surrender flickering in his gaze. I don't know how to not isolate myself," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll try. For you." April squeezed his shoulder, a small, reassuring gesture. "That's all I need." In that moment, the boundaries between them blurred, tension mixed with trust, fear intertwined with care. Michael's threat remained, looming, invisible and insidious, but for the first time, Lucas realized that retreating into isolation would no longer be enough, and that perhaps, just perhaps, he didn't have to face the coming storm alone. April found Lucas in his apartment, a space as sterile and controlled as the man himself. He stood by the window, jaw tight, watching the rain blur the city lights. He didn't turn when she entered, but he held out a thick folder. Michael wasn't bluffing, Lucas said, his voice flat with suppressed bitterness. He's been building a case for months. Forged signatures, falsified records, and enough leverage from my past to dismantle everything I've rebuilt. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted to own us both. April's hands trembled slightly as she sifted through the papers. The depth of deception stunned her. Forged signatures, falsified records, manipulative letters intended to isolate and shame them both. He wants to destroy us, she whispered, voice tight with emotion. Lucas nodded, his jaw clenched. Yes, and he thought I would let him. That I would retreat, disappear, let him win. April looked up at him, her gaze steady, unwavering. You won't. Not anymore. We fight together. The intensity of her conviction struck him with a force stronger than any threat. Lucas felt the tension between fear and hope, between retreat and trust, and finally, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. I've been running from this, from him, from everyone, he admitted, voice rough. I thought if I stayed isolated, if I stayed invisible, nothing could touch me. But now I see I can't do it alone. April closed the folder gently, setting it aside. She stepped closer, letting her hand rest lightly on his arm. You're not alone anymore. I'm here, and we'll face him together. For the first time in weeks, Lucas allowed himself a genuine smile, fleeting yet sincere. The storm outside mirrored the turbulence within, but now it felt less threatening, less consuming, because they were united in purpose. That night, they returned to the abandoned house, now partially cleared and strangely warm despite its emptiness. Every creaking floorboard, every shadowed corner, became part of their strategy, a space where they could plan, observe, and act. They worked in tandem, April coordinating details, Lucas applying his keen observational skills to anticipate Michael's moves. Each shared glance, each brush of fingers, was no longer accidental. It was deliberate, a silent affirmation of trust and mutual support. As they pieced together the evidence, preparing to confront Michael, the emotional walls between them dissolved further. Words of reassurance, small touches, and shared laughter wove a bond stronger than fear. You know, April whispered, leaning against Lucas as they sifted through the last of the documents. It's the first time I've felt like I belong somewhere, with someone who truly sees me. Lucas's chest tightened, and for once, he did not retreat. Instead, he held her gaze, voice low and certain. I see you, and I'm not letting go. The night deepened as they secured the final files, the weight of the evidence finally outweighing the fear Michael had instilled. They sat amidst the scattered records, the silence no longer heavy with secrets but thick with adrenaline. Lucas reached out, his hand finding April's and holding on with a strength that didn't need words. They were no longer two people hiding in a broken house. They were a single front, ready to turn Michael's own weapons against him. The connection forged in this wreckage was now their only truth. And for the first time, Lucas allowed himself to believe, not just in survival, but in the possibility of something lasting, real, and shared. They didn't wait for Michael to strike again. They used the house as a base, mapping his routines and pinpointing where he kept the physical originals of the forged documents. The work was surgical. Lucas analyzed entries and exits while April cross-referenced the inconsistencies in the files. When they finally breached Michael's hidden archive, a concealed compartment beneath the floorboards of the study, the air smelled of old ink and decay. They photographed every page, their movements perfectly synchronized in the dark. He thinks he's the only one who can use the shadows, Lucas whispered as the final lock clicked open. April took his hand, her grip steady. He didn't account for us. By dawn, they had enough evidence to dismantle his leverage completely. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a unit. The confrontation was quiet, stripped of the theatrics Michael expected. He was leaning against a table, his smugness a brittle mask. Crumbling yet, he asked. Lucas didn't answer with words. He dropped the folder of Michael's own forged signatures onto the wood. The sound was flat, final. We don't crumble, Lucas said. You traded in fear, but the files are photographed, backed up, and ready for a lawyer. You've lost the leverage. April stepped forward, her shoulder brushing Lucas's. It's over, Michael. You can't manipulate what you can't isolate. Michael's face contorted, looking at the two of them, a single, unbreakable unit. For the first time, he looked small in the vast, dusty room. He didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He simply turned and walked out, the heavy slam of the door signaling the end of his influence. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was clean. Weeks later, the house was habitable, imperfect, but warm. Lucas was in the kitchen, his precision now a tool for comfort rather than a shield. When a plate slipped from the counter and shattered, he froze for only a second. He looked at the porcelain shards, then at April. She didn't reach for a broom. "Leave it," she said softly. "It's just a mess, Lucas. It's ours." He let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, leaving the shards where they lay. Outside, the rain returned, but it was just weather now, not a metaphor for a coming storm. They ate at a small table, the air smelling of fresh paint and wood smoke. Lucas reached across and took her hand. "I never knew it could be like this," he admitted. "Ordinary." April squeezed his fingers. "Ordinary is the hardest thing to build." He looked around at the scuffed floors and the shadows that no longer felt like threats. For the first time, his internal walls were silent. He was finally home.